Hello, everyone, and welcome to Skill Sessions. It's lovely to see all of you arriving onto the webinar. Please say hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. I am hosting today from Bristol. It's quite grey and drizzly outside, actually. So I'd love to know what the weather is like where you are. So you've got Australia. I'm sure you'll have better weather than we do in Bristol. Hello from people in Coventry, Nottinghamshire, sunny Oxford, very nice, Stafford. Welcome everyone onto the session today. And also, let us know if this is your first time at Skill Sessions or have you been with us before? Drop a message in the chat. Today, you're here for our incredible guest speaker, Hannah Butcher. In 2022, Hannah was named as an Autism and Learning Disability Leader and was shortlisted for the Women for the Future Awards in 2023. And this was for her work as an agency managing director, where she brought in 3 neurodivergent team members and set about advocating for more understanding and accommodations in the industry. So I am incredibly excited for you to hear Hannah's personal story and learn lessons from her journey today. If you're brand new to Skill Sessions, thank you for joining us and welcome. We've been running these free online events for over a year, and there's now a community of over 1,700 of you, which is incredible. The objective of these events is to bring you experts and speakers on a range of topics around inclusion and neurodiversity in the workplace. So you can always find the latest events on the CareScribe website or by following CareScribe on LinkedIn. And we also have all of our past event recordings for you to watch back at your leisure on our website. And we've got summaries and additional information for you to explore on there as well. So I would encourage you to go and look through the back catalogue because we've explored lots of brilliant topics over the last year. So who are we? Who is hosting this event? Well, my name's Claire and I work for a company called CareScribe, and we're the organisation which makes these events happen. We're an award-winning software company based in Bristol, and we create assistive technology to help people who are neurodivergent or who have disabilities to be more productive and confident in their work and in their studies. So we have 2 products. Captioned, which is note-taking and captioning software, which helps people capture and comprehend the piles of information which gets thrown at them either at work or in education. And we have TalkType, which is incredibly accurate, lightning-fast dictation software, which works with Mac, Windows, Chromebook, on mobile and in your browser as well. So if you want to know any more about those products and what they can do for your workforce, just drop a message in the chat and the team will happily reach out to you. So if you were in the waiting room for the webinar, you should have noticed our new video with a little bit of housekeeping in it. So we'll send a survey out after the webinar to get your feedback on the event. Please let us know if you found that new video helpful. You can also request a certificate of attendance through this survey as well. Now, before I hand over to Hannah, I just want to remind you of some of those key points from the video, just to make sure that you're getting the absolute most from the Skill Sessions today. So to join in the chat, which I know some of you have been doing already, all you need to do is there is a button at the bottom of the screen and pointing down. I would encourage you to talk with other people on the call. So make sure you've changed your chat setting from panelist to everyone. That means that everyone can see your comments, and something that I'm really proud of that we've created on these skill session events is the sense of community and interaction through the chat. So I would encourage you to use it. Also, you can turn off the chat if you find it distracting during the session. So you can hide notifications by hovering over the chat icon at the bottom of your screen and just ticking hide chat previews. And you can also enable captions via Zoom if you'd like to as well. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. It means that any questions that you have don't get lost in the chat. It does get quite busy. So put your question in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. And what it also means is that people can upvote questions so we know which ones to tackle as a priority on the call. The biggest thing to remind you of today is that this session is being recorded. So you'll be sent a follow-up email tomorrow with links to the slides, transcript, and recording, and any other useful resources which Hannah sort of signposts us to during the session. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand over now to Hannah, who is going to share the impact that misdiagnoses and misdiagnosis could be having on individuals in your team. So without further ado, Hannah, I'm handing over to you.
Hi, thanks. Thanks so much, Claire. I'm just going to share my screen for everyone. Just bear with me. It's always lovely. So thank you so much for everyone joining today. That was a great introduction as well. I don't think I could have done it better myself. I will save my little intro for a few slides time, but I just want to kick off and get started because I know that all of your time is really valuable and precious. So let's get started. Today, we're going to be covering a few topics which are important to me. So I'll be covering my own personal story of diagnosis for both autism and ADHD. I'm going to be showing a couple of scenarios showing the impact of underdiagnosis and misdiagnosis, the reality of co-occurring conditions, and finally, some practical takeaways so you can better support others in your workplace. The reasons that we're talking about this, I have three. So not every neurodivergent individual gets a diagnosis, a full diagnosis, or the correct diagnosis. Some neurodivergent individuals are stuck in waiting lists. They can't face the waiting lists, or they simply don't know they're neurodivergent. And number three, not every neurodivergent individual wants to disclose their diagnosis to anyone in their life, but particularly in this aspect at work. So that means that you may have people on your team that fall into these groups. So we have undiagnosed individuals, misdiagnosed individuals, undisclosed individuals, potentially unmedicated, those who are partially diagnosed, those who are self-diagnosed, those are unaware, and those who are awaiting diagnosis as well. And every single person in all of these groups is someone that you need to consider that you may have in your team. Because if you're simply just relying on the facts of a diagnosis, it could actually be impacting your staff and overall your company. So I want to go into my personal story of diagnosis for both autism and ADHD. And before I begin, obviously, just a small disclaimer, I can't speak on behalf of every type of neurodivergence. These are the ones that so far have been identified for myself. But in this presentation, we will be covering some other types of neurodivergence as well. So I do encourage anyone who has more lived experience than me to hop into the chat and share some of your stories as well. So a little about me. My name's Hannah. I'm a 35-year-old freelance digital marketer who regularly speaks about neurodiversity. I received separate, and I'm highlighting that here, so diagnoses as an adult for autism, ADHD, anxiety and depression, and PTSD as well. And I want to highlight here that they were separate diagnoses, and none of these have ever been kind of delivered in one appointment. So they've all been treated very separately from each other. Yeah, I just had I live in Malaga too. So you noted the weather earlier. It's a little bit sunnier in Spain, so sorry about that. But the important thing for me is that my neurodivergent traits weren't noticed as a child. I don't know whether it's because I'm female, and obviously there's a higher proportion, potentially a female, that are masking, not showing their symptoms as much. I did very well in school, but I did have some quirky interests and traits that obviously weren't identified. It was just like, oh, Hannah's a little bit different. She's, just like a unique child. And that often happens. But it did mean that it basically impacted my ability to excel in university and my early career until I actually received my diagnoses and I was able to get accommodations for these. So I want to take you through some of the struggles in university because I think it's an important step. Obviously, a lot of people go through education before they become employed. And I guess I noticed that a lot of my struggles started at that level. I kind of made my way through high school. I had a few odd comments on my report cards, like Hannah never puts her hand up in class, and things that were quite specific to me as an individual. But certainly some of these areas of university then have a knock-on effect when you go into the workplace. So things that I particularly struggled with, not having any clue at this point about neurodivergence, was my timetabling and scheduling. So obviously classes happen at all times of the day in totally different buildings across campus. At my university, some of them are like outside of the usual campus as well. So you had to travel across the city to get there. All of these things were like chaos for me. So I never really knew where I was going, how long I had to get between classes, and just quite bad with the timekeeping from that perspective as well. I would say in terms of handing in reports and things, those were slightly easier for me because they were like concrete in my diary. But certainly getting to and from classes, I found very, very chaotic. I had a fear of public speaking, and I know that sounds totally ironic considering I'm speaking to you today, but this is something that I sort of learned to do over time. As I said, I never put my hand up when I was in school. I refused to answer questions in class, even though I knew literally every single answer that the teacher was asking. I just would refuse. I didn't want any attention on me whatsoever, to the point that when I was in high school in grade 11, we were supposed to do a presentation to the class, and I pre-recorded a video of me to play to the class rather than just getting up in front of the class and speaking to people. So this was a big thing for me. And in a couple of my classes, I did have to do presentations, and that gave me like the fear. It would be the only thing I'd be thinking about all the time. And then another thing was like unclear expectations from tutors surrounding my dissertation. So I actually wrote a whole dissertation. And then because I misunderstood the feedback that I had from one of my tutors about my topic, she basically said, nope, that topic isn't valid for this dissertation. I was doing journalism, and she told me that my dissertation was more media. So for me, I was like, okay, fine, whatever. So I submitted it anyway. And she was like, no, we're not going to accept it. You need to write one that's specifically journalism related. So that left me 48 hours to write an entire dissertation from scratch. And as you can imagine, quite a lot of burnout happening in that scenario. So the communication and unclear expectations definitely started at this age. And this is probably a struggle for quite a lot of people, but particularly for those who are neurodivergent. Living in a house share or university halls, and I did both of these. I found halls incredibly isolating, noisy, like so many different sensory things going on. And then living in a house share, having to like see those same individuals every day with their like annoying habits, I found really difficult as well. Like I just wanted my own space, never really felt like I was at peace or at rest. So yeah, I found that really challenging. And obviously your living environment then impacts your ability to kind of excel in your course as well. Budgeting, another thing. I'm sure a lot of those with ADHD recognize that budgeting can be quite difficult. So, you know, you get your student loan at the beginning of the year, and then how you're supposed to sort of use that over the term, I found quite difficult. And I would admit, in my first year, I got my student loan and I bought flights to Canada to go and see some of my friends. Incredibly bad decision. I thought it was an amazing decision at the time because I was like, yay, look at all this money. And then I realized that actually I needed money to survive. So it meant having to, you know, have the tin beans and all those classic university cliches. So I found this one really tricky, and I didn't really find anyone to help me with this. Lecturers who didn't share slides. So I actually, when I started my degree, I was doing journalism combined with photography. Photography was one of my amazing hobbies. When I was in high school, I had my photographs like displayed in online magazines, and it was just something I was really into. I found it very like peaceful and like a nice solo activity. I could go out into the city and take like amazing shots. But yeah, I had to give up photography after the first year because I simply had a lecturer who would not share her slides. She would keep the slide on the screen for about 5 seconds before flipping to the other one. And my brain was still trying to catch up, being like, what she said, what's the information that I need to retain from this? And I was like paralyzed almost in the way that she would say something and I'd leave with nothing. And I just had no notes because I was so stressed with the fact that she was just moving on so quickly. So I requested the slides to be sent to me, and it was a blanket no. They just wouldn't do it. So again, it's a real shame that I had to kind of give up that element of my degree because that was the area that I was actually most passionate about. But yeah, that really impacted me too. And then a big life change. So I moved continents. I was living in Canada when I was in high school, and then I moved to the UK. with my family. Obviously, I'm originally from the UK as well. So that was huge. And I didn't really know how to process it at the time. And particularly as a neurodivergent individual, I didn't really find the words to be able to explain it to anyone. And I kept a lot of those struggles internally as well. So yeah, it was a big change, moving country and then immediately starting university about a month later. And the pressure to fit in, as I'm sure that a lot of you kind of feel this in all areas of life. But there were so many new people in different classes and different halls. And it was just feeling like I needed to be a certain way to be accepted by people, which ultimately meant maybe drinking more alcohol and things like that, which I didn't really like doing anyway. But I just kind of wanted to be accepted, having always kind of felt a little bit different. So these are some of the things that I'd already started being impacted by in my life. And then you finish university and then suddenly you're in the workplace. So, you know, it's a very interesting time going from like education into work. So some of the things that I struggled with when I moved into the workplace, aside from having to get up every day and go to the office and public transport and all of those lovely things, was things like work night outs or team events. So some of these should be quite enjoyable for people, but I always felt a pressure to say yes to everything because I felt like if I said no, people were going to judge me in some sort of way. But then I'd pretty much always find an excuse to not show up anyway after the fact. But it just meant a lot of like mental gymnastics of having to think of excuses, and then like it was just really exhausting. But I did find that when I went to specific kind of nights out, like it would take me a lot longer to recover than other people would be very keen to get back to the office and be like, yeah, we had so much fun. And I'd be like, I am so burnt out and I don't want to see people for 3 days. So I didn't not go to things, but it certainly had more of an impact on me. And, you know, if there were reasons that I didn't want to go or couldn't feel like get out the door to go, I definitely found excuses to not attend all of them. So yeah, I think this is just something like team events. I would prefer things like without alcohol and potentially like activities where I don't have to talk to people as much in that way. Tea rounds, though this is quite specific, but the office that I worked in my first like proper job, there were like 8-9 of us on the team, and it was like the thing that you had to take everyone's mugs, bring them into the kitchen, make a tea for everyone, and then give them out. And I just found like whole dynamic very stressful, like a little bit of a germaphobe. So thinking about someone like doing my tea and mixing it with their spoon when they got a cold, all of these things worried me more than they worried anyone else. No one seemed to care. They were all like, yeah, make me a tea. And I'd be like, no, I'm fine. I don't want a tea. And then 15 minutes later being like, you know what, now I really fancy a tea. I'll just go and make my own. And I'm sure that at some point they figured out that I just didn't really want to be part of the tea rounds, but another social expectation. I just felt like I didn't really fit in. Again, very specific to the office that I worked in, but I had one member of my team who played Oasis every day, all day, from the minute you got into the office until you left. And I'm sure that a lot of you are like, yay, Oasis, because they're touring again. But for me, it was just like, oh, if I have to listen to Oasis any more times, then I'm going to scream. So it was like, you know, putting your own headphones on and then again, looking kind of like isolated and just standing out. And yeah, I'm hoping he's moved on music-wise since then, but probably not. And then dealing with feedback as well. So as I said, it was on a team with sort of 8-9 people. And I had one person who was line managing me. They weren't very good with feedback. And we were very busy as a team as well. But, you know, sometimes things weren't necessarily communicated very clearly. And I do remember a couple of examples where I sort of got quite overwhelmed with feedback and sort of went to the toilet and cried for a bit and felt really ashamed. And I don't think these things should happen in the workplace. So it's just about kind of having that really open and clear communication, because I wouldn't want to think of other people struggling with that now too. Phone call courtesies is another thing as well. So luckily, a lot of the comms that we do these days is by email or video chat, which is nice. But, you know, when you're having the kind of like old school video conference calls where you're all in the meeting room and you have the little conference center in the middle and you're kind of taking turns, all the time clients will be like, Hannah's interrupting me, Hannah's really rude. And for me, it was just like, I already know what you're going to say, so I'm just preempting it by jumping on to the next point. But that isn't the social thing to do. So yeah, I got in trouble quite a few times just from my way of kind of dealing with that kind of comms. And so yeah, again, made me stand out a little. Office sensory overload, the lights, the noise, the oasis, all of those things going on. I just found it really exhausting. And you know, when you get home in the evening, rather than doing anything, you just kind of want to get on the sofa and just like slob out, watch TV, and just like decompress from the day. So it did mean that it was basically work and nothing else, because that's all I could really manage to do. I did have the ability to hyperfocus, which ultimately led to like too much workload, because I basically would just be like, yeah, I'm done, I'm finished. What next? It just meant that I had too much on my plate. So at one time I was working on maybe like 19 clients at the same time in my marketing position, which is just too many. It means that you can't really like give your attention to any one person at a time, any client. And it just means that you're always working on something different. So hyperfocus for me is a blessing, and it's also evil. Sometimes it's great because I can get lots of things done, but sometimes, you know, I've done too much and then I can't really do anything else after that either. And just feeling a little misunderstood, as I said, like, so people just didn't really get me as a person. Sometimes I was called rude or bullshit or things like that. Direct, I get a lot as well. But again, this is, right, I was undiagnosed at this stage, so I didn't really know why I was that way. I kind of thought something was wrong with me. So yeah, there was like obviously an impact in my early career as well. But luckily for me, one day, one of my industry peers shared her own autism diagnosis in a social media post or a blog post, and basically the penny dropped. So I went overnight from unaware to do with anything to do with neurodivergence, hadn't really understood anything about this previously or been exposed to it. So I went from kind of unaware to suddenly self-diagnosed, undiagnosed, and awaiting diagnosis. And sadly, I waited 3 years for my NHS autism assessment, which left me as self-diagnosed, undiagnosed, and awaiting diagnosis. In that time, and I had a bit of it, I realized that I also had ADHD traits as well. So again, I was still unaware at this point, and then I became self-diagnosed, undiagnosed, awaiting diagnosis, and also unmedicated, just like another one to add to the club. Because I just didn't want to wait that long again, I decided to go private for my ADHD diagnosis. So I became partially diagnosed, but still also undiagnosed, awaiting diagnosis, and also unmedicated. And then finally, I got my autism diagnosis, which, I mean, I knew I was autistic before I got my diagnosis. But at that point, I guess it became undisclosed, and I was still unmedicated from the ADHD diagnosis as well. I chose to disclose my diagnoses at work and also in my industry, hoping to help out others. And as Claire mentioned, obviously this did lead to me sort of being able to recruit a couple of neurodivergent individuals in one of the agencies that I worked at as MD as well. So I do feel like it kind of came full circle, and hopefully some of the struggles that I went through eventually kind of helped me in my role as well. But as you can see, I actually ended up in 7 of those 8 groups that I shared earlier, all the different colors down the side. So as I said, the facts are you can't presume that people fit like one box. It's not just like neurodivergent or not neurodivergent, because there's that middle ground. And I sat in that middle ground for a good amount of time. So even though I was neurodivergent, one, I didn't know I was. And then obviously I had to wait to be confirmed that I indeed was. So it's kind of why neurodivergence in the workplace needs attention. So I want to show you some of the impacts of undiagnosis and misdiagnosis as well. So first, we look at misdiagnosis, which may be missed by individuals, teachers, caregivers, and employers. They may also be missed by medical professionals who are assessing for neurodivergence as well. Research shows that 80% of autistic females remain undiagnosed or misdiagnosed at the age of 18. So obviously I fell into this group. And you have my own kind of case study about how it actually impacted me in university and in my early career as well. And then misdiagnoses. So this is where a person has a particular illness or condition, a decision is made on that when in fact they have a different one. So it can have a really long-lasting impact because it means that appropriate support, medication, and accommodations aren't being provided to that individual. So I want to talk about Miriam. Names have been changed, but it's a story that I told a few months ago based on a case study. And I kind of want to take you through like what happened with them. So originally, the doctor said that Miriam was stressed with their school, which I'm sure a lot of people will relate to. At that point, she kind of got a diagnosis of seasonal affective disorder, which you may know as SAD. But it didn't quite fit. So later on, general anxiety disorder and depression were added as diagnoses as well. And as you can see, these things tend to come individually. But again, it didn't quite fit. So later they added bipolar and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Medication for this basically became a coping mechanism for this individual. And again, it didn't quite fit. So her doctor then suspected borderline personality disorder. But they didn't believe it. They didn't feel like that was the right diagnosis. So ultimately they stopped all their medication, and all they ended up with at this point was just a handful of misdiagnoses. The individual then self-diagnoses themselves with RSD. So you'll see that through this story, they've been diagnosed, misdiagnosed, self-diagnosed, a handful more of those groups that I shared. So we really shouldn't underestimate the toll that this can have on individuals. So the impact of these misdiagnoses, well, firstly, they're unable to disclose their neurodivergence because they just don't know, they don't have the answers. It means they're lacking suitable accommodations for their diagnosis. They might not be having the right medication or dosage. They might be taking the complete wrong thing or nothing at all. And feelings of shame or embarrassment, like, why can someone not figure me out? Like, what is wrong with me? Why can no one feel what I'm feeling? Not understanding one's own self too. So doubting their symptoms, are they making them up? Or like all of these things are going on in your mind. Feeling tired mentally and physically from all of the stress of having to self-advocate, all of the appointments that you go to, everything that you're reading online, all the conflicting information, all of those things can really stack up. And potentially leading to a mistrust of those in a decision-making position as well, because if you're going to someone that you should be trusting to give you a diagnosis and it's just not fitting and they keep changing their mind and changing things around, it can ultimately have an impact onto other decision-making positions or feeling like people of power in that person's life as well, which again can be, say, a line manager or a boss in a business as well. So they may just have feelings of distrust generally. And then a worsening of symptoms and signs as well. So if they're not getting the right support and medication potentially, then that can only just get worse over time as it's not being treated. And there are a number of co-occurring conditions, and I haven't even gone into all of them in my presentation here. For any specific type of neurodivergence, you can go online and have a look at some of the co-occurring conditions as well. And actually, I've been doing a lot of reading this week, and some of it has really opened my eyes, particularly into autism. Because neurodiverse conditions do co-occur at very high rates. And I want to go back to the single diagnosis pathways. So as I've said, I've gone through this myself where I've had to have like individual diagnoses for every single kind of thing that I've seen a medical professional for. And because of this pathway, individuals may not be aware that they have more than one type of neurodivergence. So for me, it was people around me that made me more aware of myself that I wasn't seeing in myself, because I didn't know that the traits fell into a certain pattern or a group or anything like that. So I'd seen myself as an autistic person based on something that my friend in my industry shared. But it took maybe even over a year, 2 years for me to recognize the ADHD side of that as well. And it was just because, again, someone was talking about some of the ways that they work. And I was like, but I always thought that ADHD was like this, but then you look into it and I am actually combined type ADHD. So I thought I'm not like running around all the time. I'm not shouting. I'm not loud. I'm not boisterous. So I didn't really feel like I fit that profile, but it was actually a lot wider than I expected. So obviously, if you're seeing a medical professional for an autism diagnosis, they're not immediately hopping into, hey, you might also have ADHD. You really do have to self-advocate for that as an individual. So I'm going to go through some of the core neurodivergent conditions and some of the co-occurrences that they do have. So ADHD first, obviously it's characterized by hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattentiveness, but it can often overlap with autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, anxiety, sensory processing disorder, Tourette's, and learning disabilities as well. Autism spectrum disorder, so it involves challenges with social communication, repetitive behaviors, and sensory sensitivities, and it overlaps with ADHD, anxiety, OCD, sensory processing disorder, dyspraxia, learning disabilities, and Tourette's. Dyslexia is the learning disability that affects reading and language processing, and it commonly overlaps with, again, a lot of the very similar things like ADHD, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, and all the ones that you've heard already. Dyspraxia affects motor coordination, speech, and movement. And again, it overlaps a lot with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, sensory processing disorders, and learning disabilities. Sensory processing disorders, when you have difficulty processing sensory input, leading to kind of like over or undersensitivity to stimuli. So in this example, sort of like flavors and textures of food. And again, common overlaps: autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, anxiety, Tourette's. And an important one with this as well is, I think with autism, this is something that's quite common, but it can actually be diagnosed as its own diagnosis as well. So again, it commonly overlaps, but it can actually be separate to that too. Tourette syndrome, which involves kind of like involuntary tics, whether that's motor or vocal. And again, it commonly overlaps ADHD, OCD, autism, anxiety, sensory processing disorder. Dysgraphia, which affects writing ability and fine motor skills. So commonly overlaps with dyslexia, ADHD, dyspraxia, sensory processing disorder, and learning difficulties. And then dyscalculia, which is a disability that affects mathematical skills and number processing, which again commonly overlaps with dyslexia, ADHD, anxiety, and learning disabilities as well. And then there are additional related conditions. And again, as I said, I haven't gone into all of them because there are a lot of kind of like chronic medical conditions as well. For example, with autism, epilepsy is a really common co-occurrence. But again, if you want to go and do your own research, then there's plenty of information out there. But just in terms of some of the co-occurring with core conditions, a lot of them you will have seen anxiety listed. As mentioned, I got a diagnosis of kind of like general anxiety disorder from my own GP. And again, this has never been even looked at in regards to or with any other condition that I have. So it's always been treated separately. So I have taken medication for anxiety previously. I'm not taking it anymore. But yeah, I've obviously had a couple of times where I've had medication, and there's never been a kind of consideration about autism or ADHD in regards to that medication. Learning disabilities as well. Again, they're not always co-occurring, but they definitely can be. Obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, again, is commonly co-occurs. And again, depression, which, as I said, sometimes kind of goes hand in hand with anxiety too. So these are all things to consider. So if someone comes to you with a type of neurodivergence, I think it's 8 in 10 autistic people have an associated mental health condition as well. And that statistic is quite high. So if you do have someone on your team who is autistic, it's wise to think that there may be something else that they haven't specified on their HR file, for example, that may fit into this group. So there are some practical takeaways that you can use to better support others in your workplace. So we'll just go through these now. So the first is to recognize neurodivergence beyond the diagnosis, which ultimately is kind of the theme of what I've been talking about today. So just because someone is undiagnosed, it doesn't mean that they're not non-neurodivergent. So you need to stay open-minded to the possibility that colleagues may not have an official diagnosis, but still experience neurodivergent traits. And then not relying solely on those HR records. We've touched on this as well. So don't just use these for kind of neurodiversity awareness in your organization. So just having that culture of openness without making people feel pressured to disclose, regularly communicate that support is available for everyone, regardless of formal diagnosis in the workplace. Having that safe and open culture, so encouraging open conversations about neurodiversity. So however you want to do this, optional discussion forums, lunch and learns, anonymous feedback mechanisms, where they can share challenges and request adjustments without fear of judgment. Again, when you're doing kind of like forms and surveys and things, you kind of need to have that neurodivergent view in mind. So never making things like overly complicated. Don't have like a 20-page form, because as an ADHD person, I'd be like, I'm not filling that in, there's no chance. So again, just thinking about the format in which you do those things as well. And remember that neurodivergent employees aren't there to advocate for all other neurodivergent employees in the organization. It should be up to an employer to actually do this on behalf of their employees and not use people for that purpose. It is really important to train leadership on neurodivergent support as well, so providing managers with specific training on neurodiverse communication styles, work preferences, and ways to give feedback constructively. But again, within this, recognizing that every neurodivergent individual has different needs, and that is not just like a cookie cutter, it's not one size fits all. Having that flexible work environment, so particularly in terms of work arrangements, so it might be flexible working hours, remote work options. I mentioned I really struggled with that kind of workplace environment, the tea, the oasis, the lights, everything that was going on in that office. So for me, being able to work remotely, having my own kind of peace and quiet, being able to get up when I want to, taking breaks, maybe even a nap. These are all things that I find really helpful. And then creating sensory friendly spaces as well. So if you do have like an in-work office environment and remote working is just not possible, it may be that you can provide some other spaces in the work environment that are slightly less stressful to neurodivergent people. So just reducing that sensory overload, maybe letting people wear noise cancelling headphones, having quiet work zones, softer lighting, because I would often find myself in one office, kind of getting to a point in the day where I was like, I just can't take any more people at this point. So I would take my laptop and I would go into a meeting room and it would be like so quiet. And then someone would come and be like, oh, are you on a call? Oh, no, why are you sat in here then? And it was just like not accepted to be kind of like separate to the rest of the office. And that always made me feel quite uncomfortable, like someone was judging me for being away from my physical desk, even though I was still doing my work in the office, just in a different room. So again, just being kind of like open to the fact that people may not want to sit at a bank of desks all day, every day. Practicing clear communication as well. So being really clear with expectations. I gave you a story of my university dissertation where it wasn't clear to me that the feedback was this topic isn't acceptable. It was, this is more media. Like for me, I was like, okay, cool. Journalism, media, same thing. No, she needed to say, you cannot submit this dissertation because it is not the correct topic or whatever it was. It was just not clear to me. So I just went ahead and did that dissertation. And as I said, I had to redo it from scratch. So be super clear with expectations, direct, unambiguous language, written and verbal communications. For me, I prefer to have things in writing so I can read them, process them in my own time. It takes me slightly longer with verbal presentations, for example, where I have to like really think about what's being said before I kind of catch up. So I'm always slightly a sentence behind everyone else. So written for me is much easier to process. And then breaking those complex tasks into smaller manageable steps as well. Offering multiple ways to communicate, as I said, so like I prefer written communication. So maybe rather than a phone call, someone want to just use Slack, video conferencing, email, whatever it is, to just making sure that you understand everyone's ways to communicate, just in terms of their own personal preferences and how they best retain information. And then looking at kind of the performance and feedback methods that you use at work as well. So regular feedback is helpful because, you know, a lot of people will do a sort of like yearly review, and this can be quite unhelpful. Obviously, it's nice if you're getting a pay rise, but maybe in that time you haven't been getting the feedback that you need for your performance. And if it's kind of all held up for this like one meeting, it can be quite overwhelming to suddenly get a lot of feedback that you need to do something with, and feeling like maybe you've failed or you're not good enough. And then obviously that having a knock-on effect in terms of performance. So just keep feedback more in real time rather than saving everything for formal reviews, even though obviously you need to sort of note things down on a formal basis regularly. It just helps neurodivergent employees to make adjustments or maybe even request them without feeling overwhelmed by that kind of like one big meeting that they're going to have. And then this may be something you can look at as well. It won't work for every type of role, but looking at a strengths-based approach where you're looking at what that employee excels at and finding ways to align their tasks with their strengths, like reducing the focus on their challenges. And again, there's always going to be challenges for every job or whatever it is, but just looking at the ways you can take away some of those bits that they struggle with. So just thinking about myself, for example, like when I learn a new piece of software, for me, it's really overwhelming at the beginning. So if someone immediately said, oh, Hannah, you need to just crack on with this program and just like produce this thing, I would be like, oh my gosh. Or taking someone else's template as well. Say someone's done an audit and they're like, here's one I've done earlier, use this and just replicate it. I'll be like, now I have to learn how someone's thought about this and how they've done it before I can just do it. So for me, I would rather just go in and do my own thing. So yeah, for me, doing my own template is like much better. So maybe that's something that someone would just take off my plate and, you know, let me do my own thing and then maybe put it into a different template later on. So there's lots of ways that you can work around this. And then looking at workspaces and tools as well. So offering those accommodations to individuals, but to everyone. So allowing kind of personalized workspace adjustments, which is like standing desks, alternative seating, screen magnifiers, and then accessible tools and technology as well. Obviously, hosted by CareScribe today, who have like their AI-powered captioning and note-taking software, and AI-powered dictation software as well, which can be really helpful for individuals. And then looking at your existing policies, so reviewing those policies and accommodations, how current policies are affecting neurodivergent employees. So try really simple, and I urge really simple surveys or one-to-one meetings so you can find how those are working. And then making the adjustments based on that feedback. So be open to evolving your policies as you get that new information or that feedback. So it might be things like adjusting sick leave policies, mental health days, or flexible working hours. So once you have a policy, it's not stuck in stone. It's something that needs to be iterated, particularly as you get a wider and more diverse workforce. So that's everything from me today. I've gone speedy quick through those, but I welcome any questions. Yeah, I'll hand back over to the chat.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And a side note, your slides were fantastically designed.
Oh, super jazzy.
Yeah. So you wouldn't have seen the chat, but there were so many comments, a lot of people resonating with the experiences that you described. There were loads of comments around that section in particular. Everyone found it very relatable. We have had a few questions as well, and we've got about 15 minutes left on this call. So I will just refer through to the Q&A section and fire some questions over to you, if that's okay.
Perfect.
So the first one is from Jamie, and their question is, would you tell your employer that you have requested to be put forward for an ASD assessment through your GP, or wait until actually having an assessment?
Yeah, so this is, again, totally personal preference, and I would never tell anyone to do something that they were uncomfortable with. Everyone's position in their company is different, their relationship with their employer, and the ways that the team is set up. So for me, because I'm just so open about everything anyway, it wasn't really like a a concern for me. I didn't really think it through, so I just kind of did it. But there may be consequences. Obviously, I know that I'm in a couple of networks with people who don't feel like they can disclose it to their employer because they just know that there's no one else in the organization that has disclosed a neurodivergence, and they just don't want to be the first person to do that because accommodations haven't really been set up for the team. So again, totally personal preference on kind of what you feel comfortable with and how you feel like that may affect your kind of employment. And I hate to say that because it shouldn't, but it is a reality that, you know, it can happen.
Yeah, so much of that rests in the culture of the organization that you're within as well, which I feel very strongly that should be spoken about and advocated for at like a leadership level as well. But yeah, totally agree with your point, Hannah. It's personal preference, but yeah, a lot to do with the culture of the business, sadly. So thank you for that one, Jamie. The next one is from Andrea, who is asking, are there any specific tools or techniques or places to go for managers so that they can provide the best support for neurodivergent team members, diagnosed or undiagnosed?
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously there's lots of different types of neurodivergence. So my kind of experience comes more particularly on the autism side. And there are a number of charities in the UK who kind of campaign around that. So there are kind of free like workshops you can take. So as one of the outcomes of this, I will track down some of those links for you and we'll send them across in the newsletter.
Wonderful, thank you. Also, Andrea, you might be interested to know that CareScribe, we have a newsletter called These Great Minds, which is designed and written for neurodivergent professionals, which may be useful for your team. So we'll include a link to that in the email tomorrow. We also have a LinkedIn newsletter, which is for managers of neurodivergent teams or managers who want to create neuro-inclusive workplaces. So we'll include a link to that as well for you, Andrea. So hopefully that's helpful. And then tools, obviously Hannah mentioned the tools which CareScribe produces, which is captioned and talk type, which are designed to alleviate the stress and anxiety for neurodivergent individuals in a team. So just wanted to remind you that those exist should you find them useful and want to explore them a bit more. Right. Oh, we've got questions coming in thick and fast, Hannah. Right. So the next one we have is from Eva, which is, what is the difference between high performance autism? Oh, it's disappeared. Here we go. What is the difference between high performance autism and Asperger's syndrome? There's often a lot of confusion about the possible differences between the two. I don't know if you can answer that one.
Yes. So I did a bit of research for myself, and obviously this is just kind of like my own research, so please go and do your own. But I had heard of Asperger's when I was kind of growing up, and I honestly thought that was totally different to autism, because I knew someone who had been diagnosed with Asperger's, and basically now that is just absorbed into the same condition, so it's just autism spectrum. So it's one of the same things, and I know that there's a lot of people out there campaigning for more clarity in the way that diagnoses are provided, particularly because of co-occurring conditions, as I talked about before. So if someone is autistic and has a learning disability, for example, they may need more support than an autistic individual without the learning disabilities. So again, it's a bit of a gray area, but Asperger's as a name isn't used anymore, and that's just because of some of the kind of problematic backstory behind it, basically.
Thank you. We have another one here from Isabel, which is related to the discussion that you had with your GP, Hannah. So how did you approach the discussion? They've said, I feel my GP wouldn't even believe me, but my sister has ADHD and other autistic family members, but I feel chronically tired and burnt out. So yeah, could you share your experience with that?
Absolutely. So because I'm a researcher and I like to have my facts. So as soon as I'd read this post from my friend, I was like, this is me. You can't convince me otherwise. I know I'm autistic. So I was like, I need to do everything that I can do in order to get this diagnosis, because I know it, but I want it to be kind of like valid. So I went online and I started looking up all of the autism kind of diagnosis criteria, and I read through them. So I knew exactly what to expect from the GP experience before I even spoke to them. So my GP gave me like a 10-question quiz, which they used as a barrier for entry in terms of referral. So I already knew what those questions were going to be before she asked them to me, because I had it right in front of me when I was speaking to her on the phone. And they basically used that as either this person is someone that we should just like let go and just be like, yeah, you're not autistic, or move me on to the assessment criteria, where you could actually speak to someone who is obviously a lot more qualified on that topic. So I kind of made it through the GP's test, and then from that point I got a lot of forms in the post, and waited that 3-year period to actually speak to someone. When I got my diagnosis, I cried, not because I was like, I'm really sad. It was just like all of this time and energy that I've put into this has been kind of worth it. So yeah, it's not an easy process. As you say, some GPs are easier to speak to than others. I just kind of bulldozed my way through the process, I guess.
And yeah, sort of what you mentioned there, Hannah, about sort of crying after the diagnosis, I think, it's from what I've heard from listening to other people's lived experiences, it's a very emotional journey. And when you hear that diagnosis, it's like that validation for all of these experiences that you've had. So just a reminder that if you have any other questions for Hannah, we've got about 5 more minutes in terms of time for questions. So just do drop them in the Q&A section, not in the chat, so we've got visibility of them. A question here, Hannah, from an anonymous attendee. They've said, I understand you can't directly approach the subject, but how would you advise supporting a member of your team if you felt like they might be neurodivergent while remaining as sensitive as possible?
Yeah, so I've definitely had that in my own kind of employment. So people knew I was neurodivergent, but I had other people in the team who weren't quite ready to let me know. So I kind of suspected it myself. But that's why I often say, like, try and make sure that you accommodate everyone with kind of the individual accommodations that you can provide, rather than just doing it specifically for neurodivergent or known neurodivergent people. Because, as I said, there's like 8 different groups that I shared that are like not neurodivergent, if that makes sense. So anyone could fit into any of those groups at any time. So just, being really clear with the communication, the working environment, and all of those things that we discussed, they apply to everyone, whether they're neurodivergent or not.
Yeah, that is a tricky one to navigate. So that was a really good question. Whoever popped that one in there. Stevie has a question, which is, how do you tackle changing long-standing procedures and processes and being met with the comment, it's not in the budget, when you're trying to access reasonable adjustments? Do you have any experience of that, Hannah?
I don't personally, from the kind of workplaces that I've been in, because we've always kind of put a budget aside for that, but I know that can be really challenging. I think it's just, I can't necessarily give like full advice on this or the way it's been done. But it could just be a lack of understanding at a senior level in terms of the diversity and inclusion and how important that is. I don't know whether it's worth pulling some statistics, because when you start digging into the numbers, the world of particularly neurodivergence is much bigger than a lot of people would think in terms of the number of people, particularly in the UK, with different conditions. So if you're able to provide data, sometimes that's helpful. We know that leadership love data. If they're talking numbers, can you just throw something back at them? So again, that might not be the most helpful advice, but it's just maybe somewhere where I'd start.
I totally agree with that response, Hannah. We've had speakers in the past, and this question has been posed to them as well. And a lot of it comes back to getting buy-in from the leadership team and sort of speaking their language. So to your point, often that comes back to data or staff retention. If you are supporting your staff who are neurodivergent, you can retain them. And we know that has business benefit. So yeah, a really, really wonderful answer there. I think I saw a question pop into the chat. So just bear with me whilst I scroll back. Right. So there was a question. So someone has asked, What's the best way, Hannah, to bring this up to your manager? So if you are undiagnosed, but you have a very strong sense that you might be neurodivergent, do you have any advice for how someone might approach that conversation with their manager at work?
Yeah, so I think it kind of very similar to the question we had before about like whether to disclose prior to a diagnosis or not. It could be, rather than, if you didn't feel comfortable necessarily saying like, I think I am neurodivergent, it could be just maybe some of the ways that you're struggling that are kind of traits of that, rather than going in with that big topic if that's something that you're not prepared to do. So, I think mental health generally, I know we have a long way to go, but that's maybe a little bit more known in some workplaces. And I feel like maybe it's a couple of years ahead of where we are with neurodivergence in terms of mental health awareness and acceptance. So if there are things that you're struggling with that are potentially to do with your neurodivergence, but they are having a knock-on effect in terms of anxiety or stress or anything like that, these may be kind of softer ins where you can start having that conversation about some of your accommodations that you need, which will ultimately help your neurodivergence or suspected neurodivergence. But again, in the meantime, could be accommodations that are made for you.
Nice. So we are coming up to the close of the webinar. So what I will do is say thank you once again, Hannah, for your time this afternoon. Super valuable. And like I said, it resonated with so many people on the call. So thank you for sharing your personal story. Just a couple of bits from me before we end the session. So if you enjoyed the session and you found it valuable, please help us spread the word and tell people about these events, whether that's mentioning it to a colleague, sharing it on LinkedIn. Every bit of word of mouth helps, and we're so eager to grow this community and create just a truly valuable network for everyone on the call. So whether you're neurodivergent yourself or you manage a team of people in an organization and you want to better understand how to support your team or your colleagues, please help us spread the word and grow out this community. Next month's event is Menopause and Autism in the Workplace, and we'll be joined by Dr. Deborah Leveroy from Neurobox, and we'll drop a link to register for that in the chat now, but we'll also share it in the follow-up email tomorrow, which will have a link to the recording from today, the transcript, Hannah's slides, and of course those resources that Hannah mentioned during the Q&A as well. My team are also about to post a link to the survey, which I mentioned at the start, where you can request a certificate of attendance if you'd like one. We love hearing your feedback. Honestly, it directly shapes the events. And the survey will also appear as you exit the webinar as well. So please let us know your thoughts and your feedback. Once again, emoji round of applause for Hannah in the chat. Thank you, Hannah, so much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you for everyone on the call for joining us, and we will see you next month where we will discuss menopause and autism in the workplace.